So I'm going to show you how to modify the fit to either let it out so that it's more comfortable for a gentleman, or to take it in or slimify it, a word I've recently coined, so that the fit is perfect. The best way to handle a man's suit is by taking in or letting out either the center seam or the two side seams. If the center seam has a vent below it, don't take in that seam, take in the two side seams. If the two side seams have vents below them, don't take in or let out them, utilize the center back seam. Before starting in the first place, you're going to want to make sure that a man's suit coat fits properly at the shoulders. If they hang too far off the shoulders or sit too far in on the shoulders, it's probably not a good bet to alter this garment. Here's the suit coat of a very powerfully built young gentleman. He's very broad in the shoulders, but a great deal needs to come out through the middle of his body in order to shape him the way he needs to look in this suit. Because he has side vents, I've pinned them closed. We'll now map out our strategy for taking in this great excess amount of material out so that he's shaped perfectly in his suit. Meanwhile, back to the navy blue suit, because it has a center vent, we're going to take in on the two side seams. Not nearly as much as on the other suit, but just enough to make a very nice slim fit for this young gentleman. Now, were we taking out and letting out seams on these jackets, there would be no way to, of course, pin in advance. You would simply have to take the suit apart and see how much seam allowance you had to let out. A lot of times you can feel through the suit how much you will have to let out. I can feel out to here. So there would be a substantial amount I would be able to let out if need be. So that's the strategy when letting out. Now mark all along your pin line with chalk, however you desire, whether it be little dots or elongated lines. Mark at each pin, having made sure first that the other seam is marked as equally well with pins as this side. If you like, you can do it on the other side too. It doesn't really matter. That will become clear in a moment. Now take your pins out. You can see your marks. Now that the seam is marked, rip away the lining so that you can get in there.